Society thinks of teenage girls as innocent, incapable of brutal violence, but what you're about to hear will shatter that assumption completely. These are 7 true stories of teenage girls who committed murders so cold-blooded that they earned life sentences behind bars. One 18-year-old stabbed her foster mother 178 times. Another 15-year-old lured her ex-boyfriend to his death, where he was tortured, shot, and burned. We're talking about girls who killed grandmothers, parents, and former lovers. These weren't accidents, these were planned, deliberate murders by young women who showed absolutely no remorse. From manipulating boyfriends into killing for them to actively stabbing victims dozens of times, these teenage girls proved that evil has no gender. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and comment what time you're watching and where you're from. Now, let's meet the first cold-blooded killer on our list. Case 1. Britnee Angelique Miller, the daughter who killed for money and love. Britnee Angelique Miller was just 16 years old when she committed one of the most shocking acts of parricide in California history. From San Bernardino County, Britnee was a deeply troubled teenager with a history of running away from home and serious substance abuse issues. She had a manipulative personality and was in a relationship with an older man named Robert Brandt, someone who would ultimately influence her toward the unthinkable. Britnee had previous encounters with law enforcement, came from an unstable home environment, and had poor school attendance. She associated with negative influences and showed clear signs of violence. What was most disturbing was her apparent lack of empathy for others. Britnee made impulsive decisions and wanted independence and money above all else. She was willing to commit extreme acts to get what she wanted, and when forced to choose between her boyfriend and her family, she chose Robert without hesitation. She showed absolutely no hesitation when it came to violence. Britnee's victims were both of her parents, Danette Miller and Jack Miller. Britnee lived at home with them in Apple Valley, and their relationship had become increasingly strained. Her parents tried to set boundaries, doing what any responsible parents would do. When they discovered Britnee's drug use, they confronted her about her behavior and tried to get her help. But Britnee deeply resented any form of authority. She saw her parents not as people who loved her, but as obstacles standing between her and what she wanted. She wanted their money and possessions. Despite all the challenges they faced with their troubled daughter, Danette and Jack loved Britnee and tried everything they could think of to help her. Robert, Britnee's boyfriend, actively encouraged violence against her parents. Britnee prioritized her relationship with Robert over her own family. Her parents never imagined that their daughter would actually kill them. In January 2017, at the family home in Apple Valley, California, Britnee and Robert plotted the murders of her parents. They wanted the money and possessions, and they planned to start a new life together. While Danette and Jack slept in their beds vulnerable and trusting that they were safe in their own home, Britnee and Robert attacked them. They used blunt objects and knives, and both parents were brutally murdered. The injuries they sustained showed that Danette and Jack fought desperately for their lives. The scene was horrifically violent. Britnee participated actively in the murders, showing no hesitation as she helped kill her own mother and father. After the murders, the couple stole belongings from the house, money, jewelry, and other valuables. They took the family car and fled together. In a particularly cold-blooded move, they used their dead parents' credit cards as they traveled. When police discovered the bodies, the circumstances were immediately suspicious. The investigation quickly focused on Britnee as the obvious suspect. She and Robert were fugitives for only a few days before being caught. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Both eventually confessed to the murders, showing a shocking lack of remorse. Initially, they tried to blame each other, but ultimately both admitted to joint participation in killing Britnee's parents. Britnee and Robert were both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The charges included multiple murders, robbery, and theft. Their trial took place in 2019, and the prosecution presented clear evidence of premeditation and planning. The jury found both guilty on all counts. Britnee was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, 2 consecutive life terms that ensure she will never be released. The judge called the crime heinous and said it was one of the worst cases of parricide he had ever seen. During the sentencing hearing, extended family members gave impact statements describing Danette and Jack as loving people who didn't deserve what happened to them. Throughout the proceedings, Britnee showed no emotion and offered no apology for murdering her parents. She's currently incarcerated in California, where she'll spend the rest of her life. The community of Apple Valley was shocked by the double murder. The Miller family was known locally, and neighbors described Danette and Jack as good people who absolutely didn't deserve their fate. The case raised difficult questions about what warning signs might have been missed and whether more could have been done to prevent this tragedy. The brutal nature of the crime, a daughter murdering both her parents for money and to be with her boyfriend, left the community struggling to understand how someone so young could commit such evil. Case 2. Charlie Ely, the girl who stabbed her grandmother 70 times. Charlie Ely was 16 years old when she participated in one of the most brutal murders in Largo, Florida's history. Charlie was a high school student who appeared relatively normal to outsiders. She was in a relationship with an older man, 22-year-old Jason Rojas, and their relationship was toxic and manipulative from the start. Charlie was willing to do absolutely anything for Jason. She was obsessed with her boyfriend, had low self-esteem, and desperately sought validation from him. Charlie had a history of troubled behavior, but as an impressionable teenager, she was easily manipulated by an older partner. Before this murder, Charlie had no criminal history. She appeared normal to people who didn't know what was happening behind closed doors. But she was capable of extreme violence, cold and calculated in ways that seemed impossible for someone her age. Charlie showed no remorse for what she was about to do. She helped plan a murder and became an active participant in killing someone who loved her. Charlie's victim was her own grandmother, 65-year-old Elizabeth Missy Eckley. Missy had raised Charlie, providing a stable home when Charlie needed it most. She tried to give her granddaughter structure, setting rules and boundaries like any good guardian would, but Charlie resented this control. When Missy discovered Charlie's relationship with Jason, she disapproved strongly. She tried to end the relationship because she saw Jason as a bad influence, someone who was clearly manipulating her teenage granddaughter. Missy wanted to protect Charlie from harm, but Charlie saw her grandmother's intervention not as love, but as interference. She chose her boyfriend over the woman who had raised her. Charlie began to see Missy as an obstacle that needed to be removed. Missy never suspected she was in danger. She trusted her granddaughter completely. It was the ultimate betrayal. In January 2016, in Largo, Florida, Charlie and Jason plotted the murder of Missy. They wanted the grandmother out of the way so they could be together without interference. They planned the murder for days. On the night they decided to act, Missy was asleep in her home, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Charlie let Jason into the house, betraying her grandmother's trust in the most fundamental way. Jason attacked first, stabbing Missy repeatedly, but Charlie didn't just stand by and watch. She participated actively in the murder, and together they stabbed Missy over 70 times in total. It was a brutal, frenzied attack that showed an almost incomprehensible level of rage. Missy fought for her life and begged them to stop, but they showed absolutely no mercy. The grandmother who had raised Charlie died in her own bedroom. After killing Missy, the couple stole items from the house, money, and possessions they thought they could use. They fled in Missy's car, planning to start a new life together. They left Missy's body in the home. Police discovered the body soon after when Charlie's mother went to check on Missy and found the horrific scene. The investigation was immediate and evidence quickly pointed to the couple. They were found within days and arrested. Both confessed to the murder, though they showed minimal remorse for what they had done. Both Charlie and Jason were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. Charlie was tried as an adult despite being only 16 at the time of the crime. Their trial took place in 2018, and the evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. The planning had been documented through text messages and other communications. Both were found guilty on all counts. Charlie Ely was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jason Rojas initially received a death sentence, which was later reduced to life in prison. During sentencing, the judge condemned the brutality of the crime, noting the 70-plus stab wounds inflicted on a grandmother who had raised Charlie from childhood. Throughout the trial and sentencing, Charlie showed no emotion, no tears, no remorse, nothing. She's currently incarcerated in Florida, where she'll spend the rest of her life. The community of Largo was shocked by the crime. The murder of a grandmother by her own granddaughter was devastating to comprehend. Missy Eckley was remembered positively by those who knew her, a kind woman who had stepped up to raise her granddaughter. People couldn't understand how Charlie could kill someone who loved her so much. Questions arose about the influence that older boyfriends can have on impressionable teenagers and whether there were warning signs that went unrecognized. The case drew significant media attention throughout Florida and became a cautionary tale about the dangers of toxic relationships. Case 3. Sarah Davey, the vampire-obsessed thrill killer. Sarah Davey was 15 years old when she committed a murder that would shock Rhode Island, not just because of the act itself, but because she did it for the thrill. Sarah was a troubled teenager with a documented history of behavioral issues and serious mental health struggles. She suffered from depression and had anger management problems that had been documented for years. But what made Sarah particularly dangerous was her obsession with vampire culture and involvement in the gothic subculture. She had dark fantasies that she documented online and expressed violent thoughts in posts that should have raised serious red flags. Sarah actually expressed a desire to kill, posting about it in ways that were deeply concerning. She showed no empathy for others and had a cold personality that unnerved even her peers. Sarah was manipulative with other teenagers and eventually recruited an accomplice to help her carry out a murder she had been planning meticulously. She showed absolutely no remorse for what she was about to do. Sarah was fascinated by violence for its own sake. Sarah's victim was an acquaintance, a teenage girl who knew Sarah casually through their social circles. There was no major prior conflict between them, nothing that would suggest Sarah had any reason to target her. The victim trusted Sarah and considered her a friend. She had absolutely no idea that she was in danger. Sarah had targeted her specifically, though the reasoning was disturbing. She simply wanted to kill someone. The victim was vulnerable due to her trusting nature. When Sarah asked to meet up, the girl agreed, thinking it was just a normal hangout with someone she considered a friend. She never suspected that violence was coming. She became essentially a random target, wrong place, wrong time, selected by Sarah's dark obsession. The victim was innocent, had her whole life ahead of her. The families even knew each other, which made the betrayal even more complete. In 1998, in Rhode Island, Sarah and an accomplice plotted a murder. They wanted to kill someone not for revenge, not for money, just because they wanted to experience it. They discussed their plan for weeks, working out the details. They chose their victim and lured her to meet them. The girl was asked to meet up, and a remote location was selected where no one would interrupt them. The victim came willingly, trusting that this was just a normal social gathering. Suddenly, they launched a brutal attack. Sarah and her accomplice stabbed the victim repeatedly, using extreme violence. The girl fought back desperately and begged for her life. But Sarah showed absolutely no mercy. The accomplice participated in the killing as well. They left their victim to die, then hid the body and fled the scene. They tried to cover their tracks, hoping to get away with what they'd done. When the victim was reported missing, a search began. The body was eventually discovered, and the investigation led police directly to Sarah. Her accomplice confessed and provided details about the murder. Sarah was arrested and initially denied any involvement, but eventually she admitted to the killing. What shocked investigators most was how she described it as a thrill killing. She said she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. There was no real motive given beyond morbid curiosity. Sarah Davey was charged with murder and tried as an adult. Her accomplice testified against her as part of a plea agreement, and the evidence against Sarah was overwhelming. She was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. She must serve a minimum number of years before she can even be considered for release. During sentencing, the judge noted the disturbing nature of the crime, particularly the complete lack of any real motive. The thrill kill aspect of the murder was especially concerning. Sarah is currently incarcerated in Rhode Island, and despite multiple attempts over the years, she has been denied parole repeatedly. She remains in prison to this day. The small Rhode Island community was shocked by the senseless murder. People struggled to understand how a 15-year-old could kill someone simply for the thrill of it. Questions were raised about gothic culture and vampire obsessions, with some wondering if these interests had contributed to Sarah's violent fantasies. Many felt that warning signs had been missed. Sarah had posted concerning content online and had expressed violent thoughts that should have triggered intervention. The case is still remembered decades later as one of Rhode Island's most disturbing youth crimes. Case 4. Melissa Todorovic, the girl who texted her boyfriend to kill. Melissa Todorovic was 15 years old when she orchestrated a murder using nothing more than text messages and manipulation. From Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, Melissa was a high school student who was popular among her peers. To everyone watching, she appeared completely normal, just another teenager navigating high school life. But Melissa had a hidden dark side that nobody saw coming. She was in a relationship with a boy named David Bagshaw, and that relationship would prove deadly. Melissa had a manipulative personality with jealous tendencies and controlling behavior. She was obsessive about her boyfriend to a dangerous degree. Melissa was willing to eliminate anyone she perceived as a threat to her relationship. She was cold and calculating, planning a murder carefully over an extended period. She recruited friends to help, taking on a leadership role in the plot. Melissa showed no empathy for her victim and no remorse after the murder was carried out. She was capable of extreme violence, even if she wasn't the one physically committing the act. Melissa's victim was 14-year-old Stephanie Rengel, a fellow student who knew Melissa through school. Initially, there was no major conflict between them, but Stephanie had briefly dated David before he started dating Melissa. This past relationship, even though it was over, consumed Melissa. She became obsessed with Stephanie and saw her as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Melissa was consumed by jealousy and simply couldn't let go of the fact that her boyfriend had once been with someone else. Meanwhile, Stephanie had moved on completely. She had no lingering interest in David whatsoever, but Melissa fixated on her and plotted revenge. Stephanie was an innocent victim who just wanted to live a normal teenage life. She had absolutely no idea she was in danger or that Melissa was orchestrating her death. She trusted the wrong people. Stephanie Rengel would become the ultimate innocent victim of teenage jealousy taken to its most extreme conclusion. On the 1st of January 2008, New Year's Day in Mississauga, Ontario, Melissa orchestrated a plan to murder Stephanie. What makes this case particularly chilling is how Melissa manipulated her boyfriend David from a distance. She convinced him that Stephanie was a threat to their relationship and that she needed to die. Melissa literally sent David to kill Stephanie on her behalf. David recruited a friend to help, and together they lured Stephanie outside her home on a cold winter night. When Stephanie came to her door, she was attacked immediately on her own doorstep. She was stabbed 6 times and died right there on her porch. Stephanie's parents were inside the home and heard the commotion. They rushed out to find their daughter dying. They called 911, but it was too late. Stephanie died at the scene while her horrified parents watched helplessly. The investigation began immediately, and what police discovered was shocking. They found thousands of text messages between Melissa and David. In these messages, Melissa repeatedly wrote things like, "She has to die," clearly directing David to commit murder. The evidence of premeditation was absolutely overwhelming. Melissa had manipulated everything from a distance, directing the murder like someone giving orders. David had carried it out on her command. Both were arrested, and the evidence against them, particularly the damning text message trail, left no doubt about what had happened. Both Melissa and David were charged with first-degree murder. Their trial took place in 2009, and the prosecution focused heavily on the text messages as key evidence. Under Canadian youth sentencing guidelines, both received life sentences, but the terms were different from adult sentences. Melissa was eligible for parole after serving just 7 years, while David was eligible after 5 years. Both were found guilty, and the judge specifically noted Melissa's manipulation of David through the text messages. Throughout the trial and sentencing, Melissa showed no remorse for what she had orchestrated. Here's the shocking part. Both Melissa and David have since been released on parole after serving their minimum sentences. They're currently living free in Canada, though under parole supervision. The community of Mississauga was horrified by the text message manipulation. The idea that a 15-year-old girl could orchestrate a murder through text messages, convincing her boyfriend to kill someone on her behalf, shocked people. Stephanie's family was devastated, and the fact that she was killed on New Year's Day made the tragedy even more painful. The community mourned Stephanie as an innocent victim of jealous rage. The case drew national attention throughout Canada and sparked discussions about teen relationships, manipulation, and the role technology plays in modern crimes. The fact that both killers have now been released on parole has reopened wounds for Stephanie's family and many in the community who feel that justice wasn't fully served. Case 5. Sabrina Zunich, the foster daughter who stabbed 178 times. Sabrina Zunich was 18 years old when she committed one of the most brutal murders in Ohio history, stabbing her foster mother 178 times in a frenzy of violence that shocked even hardened investigators. From Cuyahoga County, Sabrina was a foster daughter with a deeply troubled background. She had a documented history of abuse and had spent years bouncing through the foster care system. Sabrina struggled with behavioral problems, depression, and various mental health issues throughout her childhood. The Knofel family took her in, offering her what should have been a stable home environment. But instead of gratitude, Sabrina would betray their trust in the worst way imaginable. She was in an inappropriate sexual relationship with her 41-year-old foster father, Kevin Knofel. This relationship had begun when Sabrina was still a minor. Kevin had groomed and sexually abused the vulnerable teenager. Sabrina became obsessed with Kevin, and he manipulated her into committing murder, promising they could be together afterward if she would just eliminate one obstacle: his wife. Sabrina's victim was 41-year-old Lisa Knofel, her foster mother. Lisa had opened her home to Sabrina, treating the troubled teenager like her own daughter. She tried to help Sabrina succeed in life, working as a homemaker and devoting herself to her family. Lisa had absolutely no idea about the sexual relationship happening between her husband and their foster daughter. They were betraying her behind her back in the most fundamental way. Kevin wanted Lisa dead so he could be with Sabrina without interference. He convinced Sabrina to kill Lisa, promising that afterward they would finally be together openly. In Kevin's twisted logic, Lisa was simply an obstacle to the relationship he wanted. She never suspected that the two people she trusted most were plotting her murder. On the 16th of November 2012, in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, Kevin gave Sabrina a knife and told her to kill Lisa. That night, Sabrina attacked Lisa in her own bed. What followed was one of the most brutal murders in Ohio history. Sabrina stabbed Lisa 178 times, 178 stab wounds inflicted on a woman who had shown her nothing but kindness. It was a brutally violent attack that went far beyond what would have been necessary to kill. Lisa tried to defend herself and fought desperately for her life, but Sabrina showed absolutely no mercy. She just kept stabbing and stabbing. The scene was horrifically bloody, something that would haunt investigators for years. Kevin wasn't home during the murder. He had made sure to create an alibi for himself while Sabrina did the killing. Sabrina was supposed to stage the scene to make it look like a robbery. After the murder, she called 911, claiming that an intruder had broken in and attacked Lisa. But police were immediately suspicious. There was no forced entry into the home. Nothing had been stolen. The blood evidence told a completely different story than what Sabrina was claiming. When confronted with inconsistencies, Sabrina confessed quickly. She revealed her sexual relationship with Kevin and said he had manipulated her into killing Lisa, promising they would be together afterward. Kevin was arrested as well. Both blamed each other initially, but the evidence showed clear conspiracy. Text messages and planning coordination proved they had worked together to plot Lisa's murder. Both Sabrina and Kevin were charged with murder and conspiracy. Sabrina pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty, and she testified against Kevin, describing years of grooming and sexual abuse that began when she was a minor. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kevin was convicted of aggravated murder, sexual battery, and corruption of a minor. He also received life without parole. During sentencing, The judge condemned the betrayal. Lisa had opened her home to a troubled teenager, and that teenager, manipulated by Lisa's own husband, had murdered her in her bed. The 178 stab wounds were specifically noted as showing extraordinary violence and rage. Both Sabrina and Kevin are currently incarcerated in Ohio, where they will spend the rest of their lives. Cuyahoga County was shocked by the foster mother's murder. The fact that Sabrina was a foster daughter who had been taken in out of kindness made the betrayal particularly painful. The sexual abuse angle added another layer of horror to the case. Kevin had been grooming and abusing a vulnerable teenager in the foster care system. Serious questions were raised about oversight in the foster care system and whether there were warning signs that had been missed. The case led to scrutiny of how foster placements are monitored and what protections exist for vulnerable youth. The sheer brutality of 178 stab wounds left the community struggling to comprehend the level of violence unleashed in that bedroom. Case 6. Nicole Kasinskas, the cheerleader who helped kill. Nicole Kasinskas was 17 years old when she participated in a murder that would shatter her New Jersey community's assumptions about who could be capable of violence. Nicole was a high school student and a popular cheerleader who appeared well-adjusted to everyone who knew her. She seemed like a typical teenager involved in school activities, part of the popular crowd, someone with a bright future ahead. But Nicole had a hidden dark side that nobody saw coming. She was in a relationship with an older boyfriend named Joseph DeFiore, and their relationship was toxic from the start. The manipulative dynamic between them would ultimately lead to murder. Nicole was a willing participant in a murder plot, showing violent tendencies that contradicted her cheerleader image. She had a cold personality and no regard for human life. Nicole helped plan a killing and was active in its execution. She showed no remorse for what she did. When questioned by investigators, she lied repeatedly before eventually confessing to her role in the murder. Nicole's victim was 21-year-old Timothy Boyle, a friend of her boyfriend's who was part of their social circle. Timothy and Joseph had some prior conflict. There were drug-related disputes and money that Timothy allegedly owed. Tensions had been escalating between them for some time. Timothy trusted the wrong people, believing that whatever issues existed could be resolved through conversation. When Joseph asked to meet and talk, Timothy thought the conflict was going to be settled peacefully. He agreed to meet up, never suspecting that this was actually a murder plot. Timothy was in a vulnerable position. He had no weapons and came in good faith, believing he was meeting to resolve differences. He became a target because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He trusted people who were planning to kill him, and he had no chance to escape once the attack began. In 1999, in New Jersey, Nicole and her boyfriend Joseph plotted to kill Timothy. They wanted him dead because of disputes over money and drugs. Nicole was a full participant in the planning. They lured Timothy to a location by saying they wanted to talk and resolve their differences. Timothy came willingly, hoping to put the conflict behind him. But once he arrived, he was attacked without warning. He was shot multiple times. Nicole didn't just stand by and watch, she participated in the killing. Both Nicole and Joseph shot the victim. They left Timothy to die at the scene and fled, trying to establish alibis for themselves. When Timothy's body was discovered, the investigation began immediately. Witnesses came forward with information about the conflicts between Timothy and Joseph. Evidence pointed clearly to the couple. Both were arrested and initially denied any involvement in the murder. But eventually, they confessed, describing their planning and execution of the murder. The motive was revealed to be money and drug-related disputes. Throughout the interrogation and trial, Nicole showed little emotion. Her cold demeanor was noted by investigators and prosecutors alike. She showed no remorse for helping to kill Timothy Boyle. Nicole Kasinskas was charged with murder, conspiracy, weapons violations, and drug-related charges. She and Joseph were both tried for their roles in Timothy's death. Nicole was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. She must serve a minimum of 30 years before becoming eligible for parole. Her boyfriend, Joseph, was also convicted and received a similar sentence. During sentencing, the judge condemned the cold nature of the crime, the calculated way they had lured Timothy to his death, and showed no mercy. Nicole is currently incarcerated in New Jersey, and parole hearings are upcoming as she approaches the minimum time served. Whether she'll actually be released remains to be seen. The New Jersey community was shocked by the case, particularly by the cheerleader's involvement. People struggled to reconcile Nicole's image as a popular, well-adjusted high school student with the reality that she had helped murder someone. The case raised concerns about drug violence and youth involvement in drug-related crimes. Questions arose about warning signs that might have been missed, and whether Nicole's relationship with an older boyfriend involved in drugs should have triggered more concern from adults in her life. The case drew attention throughout the state and became a cautionary tale about how appearances can be deceiving, how someone who looks like a typical all-American teenager can be hiding a capacity for deadly violence. Case 7. Amber Wright. The ex-girlfriend who lured him to death. Amber Wright was 15 years old when she orchestrated the murder of her ex-boyfriend in one of Florida's most shocking cases of teenage violence. From Ocala, Florida, Amber was a high school student who was in a new relationship with a boy named Kyle Hooper, but Amber had a manipulative personality with jealous tendencies and controlling behavior that would prove deadly. She wanted her ex-boyfriend dead not because he had done anything to her, but simply because she couldn't let go of the past. Amber recruited others to help her, taking a leadership role in planning and executing the murder. She was cold and calculating, showing no empathy for the person she had once claimed to care about. Amber was willing to kill for revenge, using her history with the victim to lure him into a trap. She was an active participant in the violence and showed absolutely no remorse afterward. Initially, she tried to blame others for what happened, but the evidence would prove that Amber was the mastermind behind the entire plot. Amber's victim was 15-year-old Seth Jackson, her ex-boyfriend. Seth and Amber had dated previously, but their relationship had ended badly. Amber moved on to Kyle, and Seth moved on as well, finding a new girlfriend. But Amber couldn't let go of her anger towards Seth. She was consumed by revenge and wanted him dead. What makes this case particularly tragic is that Seth still cared about Amber. He trusted her and thought they could remain friends despite the breakup. When Amber reached out to him, he agreed to meet up, despite warnings from his friends who told him to be careful. Seth didn't listen to those warnings. He walked directly into a trap, never suspecting that the girl he had once dated was planning to murder him. On the 17th of April 2011, in Ocala, Florida, Amber lured Seth to Charlie Ely's house. She told him she wanted to talk, and Seth came willingly, hoping they could resolve their differences. But when Seth arrived, he walked into an ambush. Multiple attackers were waiting for him, Kyle and others that Amber had recruited. They attacked Seth immediately, beating him severely. Then they shot him multiple times. The torture was extended. Seth suffered for a prolonged period before finally dying. He begged for his life, but they showed absolutely no mercy. After killing him, the group burned Seth's body and disposed of it in a quarry, trying to hide the evidence of what they had done. Amber participated throughout the entire ordeal. She encouraged the violence and showed no emotion as her ex-boyfriend was tortured and killed. When Seth was reported missing, an investigation began. Tips from people who had heard about the murder led police to the group. All of the participants were arrested, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. Confessions were obtained from multiple people involved. Amber's role was clear. She had masterminded the entire plot, luring Seth to his death because she couldn't accept that he had moved on. Multiple defendants were charged in Seth Jackson's murder, and they were all tried separately. Amber was charged with first-degree murder and tried as an adult despite being only 15 at the time. Her trial took place in 2012, and the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of her role in planning and executing the murder. She was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kyle Hooper also received life without parole, and the other participants received various sentences depending on their level of involvement. During sentencing, the judge specifically condemned the premeditation involved, the fact that Amber had deliberately lured her ex-boyfriend to his death. Throughout the trial and sentencing, Amber showed no remorse for what she had done. She's currently incarcerated in Florida, where she will spend the rest of her life. The community of Ocala was devastated by Seth Jackson's murder. His family was heartbroken by the loss and by the fact that he had been lured to his death by someone he had once trusted. The detail that Seth's body had been burned shocked the community and added to the horror of the crime. Questions were raised about warning signs that might have been missed. Were there indicators that Amber was capable of such violence? The case drew national attention and was featured on numerous true crime shows and documentaries. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsessive ex-partners and the importance of listening when friends warn you that someone might be dangerous. Seth's friends had told him to be careful around Amber, but he didn't listen. His death serves as a tragic reminder of how deadly teenage jealousy and revenge can become. And there you have it, 7 teenage girls who committed murders so cold-blooded that they shattered every assumption about youth and femininity. From Britnee Miller, who killed both her parents for money and possessions, to Sabrina Zunich, who stabbed her foster mother 178 times in one of the most brutal attacks imaginable. Charlie Ely murdered the grandmother who had raised her, stabbing her over 70 times with her boyfriend. Amber Wright lured her ex-boyfriend Seth to his death, where he was tortured, shot, and burned. The motives varied: jealousy, manipulation, revenge, greed, but what's striking is the calculated nature of these crimes. These girls range from 15 to 18 years old, and every single one is now serving life sentences or decades behind bars. Looking at these cases together, disturbing patterns emerge: toxic relationships with older men who manipulated them, obsessive jealousy that turned deadly, and cold-blooded planning that showed remarkable calculation. These young women threw away their entire futures, while victims' families carry grief that will never heal. Warning signs were present in nearly every case: violent behavior, manipulative relationships, obsessive tendencies. These tragedies prove how crucial it is to recognize red flags in teenage relationships and ensure mental health resources are available before obsession turns to violence. If this opened your eyes to the reality that evil has no gender, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment: what time are you watching, where are you from, and which case shocked you most? Thanks for watching.